Hello and welcome to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Scaresbrook, also known as the Intrepid Wino. And this past week there was a fair amount of activity going on in Adelaide. There was the first ever Savour Oz event, which was organised by Wine Australia. A lot of people were invited from overseas, from wine writers, wine professionals, also sommeliers, lots of gatekeepers around the world from North America, UK, Europe, and Asia. And they were all brought together to talk about Australian wine. They had lots of different conferences, a lot of messages were coming out of it. And if you were following Twitter like I was, a lot of interesting information came out about it. Hopefully, all these people from around the world went away with positive messages about Australia and Australia's wine. One of the big things that came out of it for me was the push about restaurants and sort of point out to the world that dining is such an important part of modern Australia now, and hopefully that will flow through with the wines so that people understand that the wines we do make in Australia are not necessarily all big blockbuster wines that don't go with food. Because we have such a vibrant dining scene in Australia, there is that need to have wines that do pair very well with food. I guess probably for me was one of the disappointing things about it was that a lot of the representation was from big players in the domestic wine market, whether that be big wine companies, big wine producers, or big retailers. There was less influence from smaller producers, but I guess at the end of the day, it's about who can afford to be involved with the program and who pays the most in levies in particular. But I guess that event has its need, its relevance. It's probably not necessarily the kind of stuff that I'm going to talk about, and certainly not what this podcast is about, particularly with today's guest. So today I've invited in a guy by the name of Daniel Honan, who is also known as the Wine Idealist. He's originally from Newcastle. He has a background in journalism, but had discovered a passion for wine in London, from what I understand. And he is back in the Hunter Valley now, working on a number of projects, including his blog, where he writes about everything biodynamic, organic, and natural in terms of wines in Australia. So it's his big passion. I thought it'd be interesting to invite him in to talk about not only himself, but why he's so passionate about those kind of things. So thank you for joining us, Daniel.
You're welcome, James. No worries. Thanks for having me.
So take us back to Newcastle. Growing up in Newcastle, obviously Newcastle is in the Hunter Valley, which is one of Australia's most historic and well-recognised wine regions.
Yeah.
Well, what was that like growing up? And did you have any contact with wine back in those days?
Not really. When you live in the Hunter Valley, a lot of people don't really have the appreciation that there are some of the best wines in the world literally on their doorstep.
Yeah.
And the thing about the Hunter Valley is that it's Australia's oldest wine region. Mm-hmm. You know, it started the whole thing. James Busby planted the vines at Branxton in 1825, and we've never actually suffered from phylloxera. So we actually have some of the oldest vines in the world as well, which is really cool. And I didn't realise any of this until I came back from traveling around Europe and that sort of thing. And
that's interesting because the old vine is such an important component of the Barossa Valley, and also there's a number of vineyards in Victoria who sort of really champion the fact that they've got own rooted vines dating back to the mid 19th century. But the Hunter Valley is it's something that they maybe don't talk about that much.
I don't think it's... Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that they don't really talk about. That I learnt this from Bruce Tyrrell, chatting with him, and he was, mentioning the fact that we hadn't received any phylloxera in the Hunter. So because a lot of the vineyards in Europe had been grafted with Californian rootstock in order to save them back in the day, and because it had never arrived in the Hunter, then... as according to Bruce Tyrrell, we have some of the oldest vines, but it is something that I guess they don't really talk about, and I don't know why that is.
So you didn't have any contact with wine yourself?
Oh yeah, heaps of contact with wine. Absolutely. Oh, okay. Yeah, through university, one of the things was if you went out in town, between the two pubs, we had little electrical boxes, and there was lots of reeds and weeds and things growing up and around the electrical boxes, and between the two pubs there'd be a goon sack, And so you'd walk from one pub.
A goon sack, can you
like
just explain for our audience who might not know what that is?
A goon sack is the silver bladder inside a box of wine.
The plastic bladder.
The plastic bladder, yeah, the silver plastic bladder that you get. And anyway, we would basically remove that from the cardboard box, hide it under amongst the reeds, so that when you're walking from one pub to the next, you'd have a stop-off point so you can drink some... I mean, my friends and I, we used to drink Stanley Dry Whites and mix it with lemonade. We were total fascists. But that's university
days. A white wine
and,
spritzer?
Yeah, exactly. They're university days. And
what did you study at uni?
Journalism.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you followed that career path?
Yeah, I did. I finished uni. I graduated in 2008 and moved down to Sydney and worked for Foxtel.
Okay.
For a little while.
News Corp.
Yeah, Rupert's
Mr. Murdoch,
my old mate. To be fair, it was a pretty cool gig. But I then got a gig at the ABC before moving over to.
Probably could not have got two more different places to work.
Well, the intention when I left uni was to always work for the BBC.
What sort of journalism do you have, or did you have a particular interest in any kind of journalism?
When I was doing it, I was still starting out, so it was a lot of broadcast stuff in the initial days.
Yeah.
By the time I got to London and I got a gig working at the BBC in West London, that was in sort of like an assistant producer role. So I would help the producer gather material for whatever was breaking in that particular day. You might get assigned a certain number of stories, and then it'd be up to you to acquire that information from the journalists out in the field, or any video, any audio, any copy that you might need to write, something like that. And, that was cool. And you're working at the BBC, that's pretty amazing. That's the whole point of moving to London, was to work there. And, it was a very immense privilege.
And in your time as working as a journalist, did you maintain any kind of connection with wine at all, or I can imagine journalists being
they're all
heavy
booze
drinkers.
hounds. Absolutely, borderline alcoholics. There was a bar down the road from where we worked at the BBC called the Albertine.
Okay,
I used to go in there, and I became friendly with the staff, that sort of thing. Did a few shifts, just to kill some time, and found out that it was actually far away more enjoyable than presenting bad news stories each and every day. You're learning about this incredible thing called wine, and a lot of the times you'll come across millions and millions of bottles and they won't really do much for you, but occasionally you'll stumble across one that changes your whole perspective of what it is. And we had this one particular one from the Loire called Le Clos Mobile, and it was a Cab Franc. And it was the most amazing wine I think I've tasted to this day. We used to call it the wine porn. And we did it by the glass. And if ever someone asks, what's your suggestion for a wine, we would suggest the Le Clos Mobile, just so that we could have the bottle open, because at 9 o'clock we were allowed to drink the wines. Yeah. That was part of the thing. So if we could make sure that bottle of wine was open by the time 9 o'clock rolled around, then we can hook into the wine porn that we called.
So just taking it back, when you were still working with the BBC, was it the experience of this venue, or was it a particular wine that you tasted that kind of really there was an explosion of interest in wine for you?
No, I think, to be honest, it was more the whole experience. The Albertine as an entity.
Was it immediate, or was it gradual?
No, it was immediate. The people that worked there, Giles Phillips, the owner, he's owned and ran the place for 32 years. Extremely knowledgeable in his wines, but retains a whole lot of hubris about it. He won't sort of try and impress you with his knowledge. He just trusts his palate and asks you to do the same thing.
Sure.
And that approach really kind of, I guess, sat well with me. I guess it was. I hesitate to use the word inspiring, but it was like that.
Yeah, of course.
He showed me some amazing wines. The staff, a lot of them are all my best friends now, and just the whole place as a whole. The context of the Albertine is what made wine so amazing.
Who actually initiated? Did you sort of express interest in working there, or did you kind of say, I'm not really loving working as a journalist, and Giles sort of said, well, why don't you come start working here?
I was the initiator, to be honest. I mean, Giles always wanted me to work there. He started inviting me to tastings and things like this, and started to ask me
Wow.
for, he would show me a bottle of wine and ask for my opinion, which was cool. And I used to get called the golden boy by the other staff, the girls that worked there, because he'd open up special bottles and things like that, and he'd be like, Giles never does this. Why is he doing it for you all of a sudden?
Yeah.
And I guess that was just that sort of gentle encouragement and validation that you might know a little bit about wine. You might want to know a little bit about wine, so I can kind of show you, I suppose. And going to tastings and things, it was really cool. We went to a tasting over in for Liberty Wines. It's a massive.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. I think it's like the biggest trade tasting in the world or something like that.
It was huge. It was daunting, and you couldn't even get through half of them. You had to really set a list. But we went
and for the uninitiated, it's probably going to be even more daunting.
Yeah,
even for the experienced people who are used to assessing wines almost every day.
Yeah,
it can be pretty intimidating. But for someone who's never seen that kind of thing before, I could imagine it being pretty just all these wines.
It was tough to get your head around. I mean, we had this massive, thick binded book that had all the wines listed that were on show that day. It was over at the Oval cricket ground.
Okay.
And up in one of the function centres there. And the Real Wine Fair was going to be on.
How long has that been going on? Because I've only just sort of recently been introduced to it. In fact, I heard about Rootstock before I heard about the Real Wine Fair.
There was the Natural Wine Fair in Borough Market, probably, I think it was late, maybe October in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Real Wine Fair and Raw popped up.
Yep.
And I went along to Real Wine Fair. It was the first one in Holborn underneath. It was almost like in a car park or something. Yeah.
That's different.
And it was, I just went along and as a representative of the Albertine.
Yeah.
Giles,
so at this point you were working there?
At this point, yeah, I'd quit the BBC and kind of gone and done casual work for them. We're working full time at their bar.
How did your parents feel about you chucking in a career in journalism to?
They've always been pretty cool with my decisions. They know that you can if you can get it done, then good luck to you.
That's good,
and we'll support you. But I went to the Real Wine Fair as representative of the Albertine. Giles couldn't go for whatever reason, and so I went. And I had my little tasting notebook and pen, and was super nervous because it was the first time I'd been to one of these things by myself, and rocked in and wasn't sure about the etiquette, how you do this, what the rules were,
tasting order, that kind of thing.
Yeah, this sort of thing. So I just kind of rolled in, and there's just this hum and buzz in this underground space underneath Holborn, and all this chatter and all this noise and all this talking going on.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'll start at the beginning, and sort of worked my way around, and then got a little bit fatigued, went and had something to eat, walked around a little bit more, spoke to some Spanish producers, spoke to some guys that we had their wines on in the list where I worked.
Yep.
And there was this tiny little corner up a few flights of steps, and there was about 3 or 4 Australian producers.
Yeah.
And all these wines were natural, organic, and biodynamic. That was the remit.
Okay.
And there was just these 3 or 4 producers, and I was like, okay, because there was Italian, Spanish, French, German, loads and loads of guys from Europe, all doing this stuff.
Anything from North or South America or South Africa?
That
you remember?
Not that I remember.
Okay.
But I'm sure that there would have been.
Sure.
But yeah, these guys, and anyway, so I think one of them might have been Tom Sherbrick, but the one that I do remember was Castagna.
Julian.
And Julian was there with Adam, but I struck up a conversation with Adam Castagna, and he poured some wines. Adam's rib was nice, really, really, really nice. Poured the Insugrato 2009, and that was even better. That was incredible. Mm-hmm. And then he poured me the Genesis Syrah.
Yeah.
And I just lost my mind.
Yeah.
Like I literally lost my mind. It was just like the most incredible thing I'd ever tasted in my life. It was, It smelt, it just, I don't know. wonderful, brilliant, beautiful. All these words don't even really do it justice. And that was kind of the wine. You know, you have a wine where it's just like, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's profound. It's
guess-
exhilarating. It's like hearing the voice of God almost.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like just that moment where you go, okay, now I get why people just go on about this stuff all the time.
But I think it's more than that. I think it's the fact that you finally have found something that speaks to you, and something when you say, "Oh, I get it," it's not a question of, "Oh, I see what everyone else gets." It's like, "Oh, I get it," you know. And this is what I'm finding in this is really speaking to me, personally. Before that, how much of the natural biodynamic organic wines were on the list of the Albertine?
Oh, there were a few. That Le Clos Mobile,
Okay.
the one that we used to open up.
Was that a Chinon?
That was no, it wasn't from Chinon. No, it wasn't. It was from a tiny, tiny little producer. I don't even know a great deal of information about it because there isn't any information. I tried to look it up numerous times, couldn't find anything.
That's not a unique problem there.
Yeah, but
particularly with those kind of wines, these are producers who are really, they're farmers, and obviously all their attention is put into tending for their sites, their vineyards, and making the best wine. They don't really have a lot of time to be speaking to people or to be putting beautiful websites with lots of information together. It's about just making really great wine.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of the big introduction to those kind of wines, this big fair, and how ironic that the other side of the world, you got introduced to an Australian wine that spoke to you. And do you think that maybe there was more of a connection because it was an Australian wine?
It sparked a curiosity, to be honest.
Sure.
Because my opinion, most of the world, is that Australian wines are consisting of, Yellowtail, Hardy's, Jacob's Creek,
Sure,
Lindemans, and you can go into Sainsbury's or Tesco's and spend, £6 and you've got a nice bottle of red. And it's the same nice bottle of red as you could have bought 10 years ago. It's exactly the same. And that's nice, and they've got a purpose and they've got a point, and I'd prefer people to drink those wines than not drink wine at all.
of course.
But
if it went for that wine, then an Australian wine wouldn't be the most consumed wine or country of origin in the UK. It's all well and good for them to say, "Oh, we export X amount." We're, I think, the fifth largest exporter of wine in the world, Australia, and I think at least 50% of the wine is exported. But then you have to look at who's exporting it and what's the average bottle price, and it's significantly lower than the wine we actually do consume in Australia.
yeah,
And maybe I think to be honest, Australian consumers don't even know how good we've got it. That the quality of Australian wine is so good, and the rest of the world doesn't really know that much about it. But you're right, there is that perception. I visited producers overseas, particularly the ones in Europe, all had that perception about Australian wine. And you think, well, that's not true, but at the same time, that's the one that they have access to.
yeah,
They have access to that fairly large-scale commercial wine, which is going for uniformity and consistency from vintage to vintage, where regionality is almost irrelevant.
and they're the flagship wines that we present over in Australia. And look, there's not an issue or a problem with that. What was profound for me in that glass of Genesis was that I'd never tried anything like this before from Australia. And it was from Australia, I think, is probably the most important thing. It was from Australia. I was like, all of a sudden, like, wow, like, do we make this in Australia? Can we grow this?
Yeah.
Can this happen?
Yeah.
And I went back to the Albertine and was just like, Giles, we need to get this on the list.
Yeah.
I mean, it's expensive wine. It is an expensive bottle of wine, but we could tick this over. I mean,
More importantly, you could tick it over.
yeah, I could tick it over.
I'm Australian. This is Australian. What more reason?
Just drink it. Just drink it. So fast forward, basically, I couldn't get my visa renewed because working in a bar wasn't considered a profession. So if I'd have stayed at the BBC, I could have stayed in the country. But I changed careers instead, for that meant coming back to Australia. And so when I arrived back in Australia in November, I just wanted to find out more about good as like these kind of wines. Are there any more? Are there any more Castagna wines? You know, like, is there anyone else doing this sort of stuff?
Yeah.
And I looked at what Castagna were doing, and that was biodynamics. And I tried to figure out what that was.
Yeah.
And read a little bit of information. And then I realized that a lot of the wines that I enjoyed while I was drinking at the Albertine, when I was going out in London, the Real Wine Fair, these sorts of things, a lot of them were either natural, organic, or biodynamically grown wines.
It's one of those things where they don't necessarily publicize that. It's just, that's just the way we do it to make the best expression that we can. And even though certification is so important to a lot of producers, a lot of other producers say, I don't need to get certification. I'm not doing it. I'm not justifying it. I don't need to justify it. The proof is in the glass, and the proof is in the kind of wine that I want to make and that I want to drink.
That's right. Certification is an interesting topic because some people are against it very heavily and some people are totally for it.
Sure.
You know, those that are certified will say you need to be certified. If you want to say that you're organic, if you want to say that you're biodynamic, then you need to be certified.
Yeah.
Those that don't want to be certified will have a different argument and say that certification is utilized as a marketing exercise.
Yeah.
And that their word, that their honesty, that their intentions as a winemaker or a wine grower should be all that the consumer needs. And they won't put it on the label, A, because they can't, but B, because it's not important to them. It just happens to be a tool that they use for making or growing these particular wines. I don't know. I haven't really made up my mind in terms of whether or not certification is worthwhile or not. What I would prefer to see is conventional viticulture just be organic or biodynamic and not really made a fuss about. And conventional agriculture as we know it today is called chemical agriculture. So it sort of flips around. I don't understand how we got to a point where we're using agrochemicals on our properties, no matter if you're farming, you know, an orchard, strawberries, oranges, grapes, whatever. And this is considered conventional. Conventional agriculture is just, it's an insult to the planet and degrades the soil and makes it unhealthy for everybody. But
unfortunately, though, we couldn't produce the amount of wine in the world that we do if it weren't for conventional techniques.
Yeah. I think the point to get across would just be that shouldn't be called conventional agriculture.
No.
It should be called something else. And chemical's probably a bit too loaded, but that's what it is.
Exactly. Chemical has that very negative connotation. So conventional is it's a bit of marketing spin, to be honest.
Well, I mean that is it. I think it's interesting that it's got to a point where conventional. You have to, you talk about certification.
Sure.
You have to get audited, pay a little bit of money, a lot of money sometimes, to various certification boards, and you have to basically go through all these steps and hoops to prove that you've done nothing essentially in the vineyard. Organic viticulture is all about what not to do.
Sure.
You know, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this.
Yes.
Biodynamics is a little bit beyond that, and it shows you what to do, but also what not to do.
Sure.
But the thing is, you're not kind of doing much out in the vineyard, as if you were adhering to a spray calendar from.
I think probably initially there is a fair amount of work that needs to be done. You basically need to. By taking away things like irrigation and chemicals, which the vines are relying on, which has obviously led them to being so lazy, and the roots not going very deep because they don't have to go far to find the nutrition and water to live, basically. By taking that kind of thing away, the vine is going to struggle. So you have to do certain things to try and help it find that balance.
Yeah.
That its own harmony and strengthen enough to to not need those kind of things. Basically, it's like you're coming off drugs. Basically,
Yeah.
it's pretty tough just to go cold turkey. So you have to find some way to sort of help in that recovery process and regeneration. Which is why, obviously, with the certification, you can't. The certification process takes 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and, exactly. But the fact that you have to put that on the label, you have to prove that you're doing these things out in the vineyard that are fairly innocuous and fairly treading a lot more softly than if you were spraying with any sort of pre-emergent chemicals, whatever, fertilizers, all the sides, and pesticides and things like that. Why you have to do that when you can go and spray and not have to say anything? It's kind of cart before the horse mentality.
In my studies with the University of Adelaide, we did look at sort of viticulture, and we sort of talked very, very, very briefly on organics and biodynamics to sort of get an idea about what they are and how they're different to conventional viticulture. And the kind of the distinction that I made, obviously, particularly between conventional and organics, is that, as you say, it's more a question of allowing it to find its own health and strength to resist things that you would need chemicals for, and to find ways for it to naturally provide good, healthy yields without the need of fertilizers, and to find water sources deeper down, so the roots have to go deeper to find water, so you don't need irrigation, that kind of thing. And conventional viticulture, as you say, it's basically a recipe. It's you do it at certain times, irrelevant of what any kind of data is going to show you, whether that's weather or pest control. I kind of make the distinction between organic and biodynamic, where organic is you're trying to do almost nothing, whereas biodynamic there is still sort of a recipe involved. In terms of preparations and tearing between the rows, that kind of thing, just to sort of ameliorate, open up the soils. There is still a certain element of a system in place, but obviously at the same time still trying to encourage the vines to find their own natural harmony with the environment, and to try and encourage a bit of biodiversity.
Yeah, it's softer. It's softer farming. That's all it is. It's really, I mean, it's not rocket science, to be honest. It's
well, this is one of the things that a lot of them say is that, this is nothing new. Like, we talk about this, like biodynamics and organics is this new thing, but my grandfather was doing it this way, and there was no such thing. It was never called anything, but this is just the way we did it. We know we have our plots. Of course, we're talking about the old world. We're talking about Europe. We have our plots, and we have inherited knowledge about the best way to tend for our soils and our vines to be the best they can be each vintage, and to find that, and to be strong enough to have resistance to pests or weather or fungal disease, that kind of thing. But one of the things I found interesting is that places that already were doing it were sort of saying, yeah, that's the way we do it. Nothing new. But then there were places in Europe that converted, which is difficult in a lot of regions because you don't have an entire vineyard. Like sitting by itself, you don't necessarily have a whole vineyard to yourself. Through the process of history, inheritance, that kind of thing, you might have a plot or several plots in one vineyard. So to convert those particular plots to biodynamic or organic viticulture is complicated because you've got everyone around you who might still be using conventional viticultural techniques, and they're still using irrigation and chemicals, that kind of thing. In the new world, because that doesn't really exist, you have your own vineyard, and it's unlikely you're going to have anyone else's vineyard either around it or next to it. It's much easier to control that. You can use those kind of techniques and not have any impact around it. Although I will say that I have visited some vineyards in the world that, it is one vineyard. It's all owned by the same winery or company, but they have a section of the vineyard that is biodynamic, or a section of the vineyard is organic, purely to get certification, to put it on their label, to say, hey, look, we have a biodynamic wine. We love the environment. And, I was being taken through and they said, oh, that's the biodynamic section. I said, what about everywhere around it? And they said, oh, no, it's still conventional. We used to use chemicals. Oh, so is there like this invisible wall that protects that vineyard from all of the sprays you're using and all of the irrigation? You reckon there's no impact on that one section?
Yeah. They probably, I mean, a lot of them sometimes they start with one site and trial.
Sure.
Organic or biodynamics on the thing. But you can't be half pregnant.
Yeah.
If you're going to make a biodynamic wine and then make other wines, I mean, you are using it as a marketing tool.
Sure.
And like when it comes to stuff like this, I am an ultimate romantic and an idealist. That's why it's called the Wine Idealist, because you can't be half pregnant. You've got to commit fully to an ideal or an idea, and see that through to the best possible way that you can do it. So, for you to have a section of your vineyard that's paying token props to biodynamics is just an insult to wine. It's an insult to everything.
Sure.
Because it's like McDonald's when they chuck on their salad sandwiches on their menus.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we got a lot of stick after Morgan Spurlock put out that documentary, so we'll make a salad. And it's like no one goes to McDonald's to eat salad.
No.
You know what I mean? Because McDonald's isn't healthy. We know it's not healthy.
Yeah.
But God damn it, I like it when I'm hungover.
Yeah.
Okay, and I accept that. That's my personal choice.
Of course.
But don't pander to some kind of idea that you think that I'm not going to come into your store unless you've got salad on the menu.
Sure.
Or I'm not going to buy your kinds of wines unless you've got an organic wine.
Yeah.
I don't really care. If it tastes good, that's the most important thing for me. And I'm not really interested, when I'm drinking my wines, whether or not they're conventional or organic, biodynamic or other. What I've found from personal experience is that a lot of these wines that are made with a softer approach, with a more natural, gentle, sustainable approach to their viticulture, their wines seem to taste a lot better, in my opinion.
Okay. One of the kind of contentious topics of discussion with this whole issue is the fact that, particularly in terms of certification, it's only for viticulture. So, like, to say that you are a biodynamic organic is purely about how you are actually growing the grapes. What about the actual wine making? That's the kind of thing that I always ask. Well, do you have the same philosophies when it actually is brought into the cellars? Because I've seen quite a few wines that they don't really taste as if they are biodynamic organic, even though they're claiming to be that way, because they might be using techniques in the winery that are kind of almost defeating the purpose.
Well, they're winemaking. Winemaking is winemaking. Real wines that are great are made out in the vineyard. Mm-hmm. So if you get really good fruit, if you grow really good fruit, and there's a real concentration of flavor, of characteristics, all these beautiful things that we are given inside this little berry. Mm-hmm. If there's a concentration of all of that, then it's very easy to then make that into some wine. You can still stuff it up. You need a caretaker. You need an interpreter. So you don't need a manipulator. No. If you've got really poor quality fruit, you need a manipulator. Yeah. You need to be able to lift the acids, decrease the sugars.
Basically hide the flaws.
Yeah, exactly. Plug up the holes. Mm-hmm. Ray Nadeson from Lethbridge Wines, I was speaking to him on Wednesday, and he gave this analogy of a pebble with like holes in it. Mm-hmm. If you want to make a carving of a really beautiful, like maybe a piece of marble. Say you got a piece of marble, mm-hmm. and you want to make a statue out of it. If that marble is riddled with holes, the statue by the end is not going to be as... You're going to have to work really hard to manipulate and shape those holes mm-hmm. to get a really nice statue. If mm-hmm. you've got the really nice, big, beautiful block of marble to begin with, mm-hmm. then it's quite easy to just adjust and take things away as required or whatnot. So just because you're growing organic or biodynamic fruit in the vineyard doesn't mean your wines are going to be great.
Sure.
You still need a caretaker in the winery to be able to interpret that fruit that's being grown out there.
Sure.
And what you'll find is a lot of people that are either organic or biodynamic will have that kind of soft approach in the vineyard, and they carry that through to the winery.
Mm-hmm.
So they realize, well, we've already got really good fruit, so let's not screw it up. Let's try and just ferment it. And, you know, some people will add things if they need to, if there's a little bit of acid lacking, or, you know, maybe the alcohol's too much. But they're out there working in the vineyard first and foremost.
Yeah.
And in the winery, it's just it's a caretaker role.
And hence why there is such respect for the term vigneron, because those are the people who are actually taking it from where to go. They're tending their vines, they're harvesting the fruit, and they're making them wines themselves.
You need, if you're a winemaker, you need to know what's going on in the vineyard, because that's your product out there.
I think there are a lot of winemakers who would disagree.
Yeah, and there are, absolutely. But
you should know.
If you're a carpenter, you don't need to go and walk around the forest and check out the redwoods.
Yeah.
But you know, you need to find out where the factory.
The fact is that once the fruit gets to the winery, it's too late to fix problems in the vineyard. So you should be involved from the very beginning to actually start to say, well, this is the kind of fruit that I want. Therefore, you should be doing this.
Yeah, or yeah, exactly. They're working in partnership.
Yeah,
you know, and that's why a lot of these organic biodynamic wines, they have a sense of provenance, because generally the vineyard is very close to the winery, and they do work rather than renting off properties and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And so, in terms of the Wine Idealist, the blog, what you're trying to communicate and what you're passionate about, I believe that sort of played into, and maybe even inspired by some of these fairs that you attended in London. I believe you sort of ran something recently in Newcastle along the same lines.
Yeah, well, Rootstock happened in February, and I was blown away by that, because that opened the lid off Australian wines and New Zealand wines even more. You know, I was like,
so that was a fair in Sydney.
Yeah, that was a fair in Sydney, organised by guys from Enoteca, and Mike, Benny, James Hurd, and Giorgio. His last name escapes me, but anyway, that was like, holy crap, this is amazing.
And was that anything to do with Return to Terroir?
No, not really. It was basically these three guys. They liked these types of wines.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can put on a festival.
Okay.
And that's what they did.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I really like these wines.
Sure.
And I want people to know about these wines. And the Hunter Valley was where it started for me. Mm-hmm. There's 4 Hunter Valley wine growers, and I wanted to connect them all together and bring them into a single space and have a dinner that showcased not only their wines, but the produce that we can get from the Hunter as well. I really wanted to just push the Hunter Valley.
Sure.
What ended up happening, though, is we were like, well, let's go the whole hog and put on a tasting in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. So in lieu of getting any of the producers actually over to pour their wines, although some of them did come, we had the wineries send us 6 bottles, 3 bottles of wine, 3 bottles of red. They wanted to showcase some literature that we could put out. Yep. And we grabbed some pourers, some guys that knew a little bit about wine, a little bit about talking about this particular wine, these wines. Yeah. And invited people to come along. Mm-hmm. We opened our doors on Sunday, the 28th of July at 1:00. By 1:25, we had lines out the door. Mm-hmm. By 1:45, we were turning people away. We'd sold 160 tickets in total for the tasting. Sure. And we had 60 people come through the dinner. And those 4 Hunter Valley winemakers got together. We were paired, their wines were paired and matched with a 5-course degustation by Tim Montgomery, who was an incredible chef in Newcastle. And it was just a day where it was like, wow, yeah, real wines, artisanal wines, natural, organic, biodynamic wines. People are curious about them. People want to drink them. People want to find out what's going on. And to host something like that in Newcastle is no mean feat. Sure. It's pretty tough to do things like that. There's loads of events going on. There's lots of competition for things. And it was pretty cool to see that you could create something like that.
Sure. And obviously you're down here in Melbourne on a bit of a road trip. You've brought a buddy down from Newcastle, and obviously you've been mentioning some local Victorian producers, and you've been sort of travelling through some of the regions. How have you found it?
Victoria's blown me away. The initial idea was to accumulate a whole bunch of stories for upcoming articles.
Sure.
But also to I'd never really driven through Victoria as an adult. So I'd gone through on family holidays and things like that. And the fact that there were this lid had opened up, this hole had opened up, and these guys are floating around. I thought, well, let's go and check them out. Let's have a look. So we started in Beechworth, and we went to Sorenberg, and then we went to Heathcote, to Jasper Hill, and the drive from Heathcote through the Macedon Ranges was one of the most stunning drives I've done in Australia.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I didn't even realise that a place like that existed in Australia. You drive from Christchurch to Central Otago, and you're blown away every step of the way. No matter where you look, you're looking at something incredible.
Yeah.
It was similar to that.
Yeah.
You know, these great big boulders, these lovely rolling hills, these white clouds, blue skies, grey clouds, sheep, cows, all these beautiful things. And you think, this is cool. This is in Australia as well. This is unreal.
Yeah.
So we went to the Macedon Ranges, to Cobar Ridge, and then out to the Grampians, and to Dunkeld, and spoke
you went to the Royal Mail?
We went to the Royal Mail on Wednesday night, for dinner, and had dinner with Tamara Irish from Enigma Variations in Dunkeld. Okay. She's a natural winemaker down there.
Wow.
Then across to Geelong, spoke to Lethbridge, Lethbridge Wines. Yesterday we were in the Mornington Peninsula at Avani, which is in the Mornington on Red Hill, and we had an amazing afternoon yesterday. Such magical hospitality. There was rainbows forming in the skies. They were landing in the vineyard. Shashi and Devendra Singh, who are the owners and one winemaker, they cooked up this pasta, and we had cheese, and we drank, all these vintages of their Avani Syrah, and it was amazing. So we're in Melbourne now to check out sort of the small bar scene, see what's happening around here, see if it's as big as what's going on in Sydney with this natural wine scene. These guys that are pushing these kind of wines. Sunday we're going to be in the Yarra, and we're going to go and hang out with Bobar, Tom and Sally Belford from Bobar Wines, and then we'll be at 1,000 Candles on Monday with Bill Downey. And then driving up back to Beechworth for a rendezvous with Castagna.
A reunion, almost.
Well, it'll be,
almost like coming full circle.
Yeah. I'm going to be a big fanboy when I get there, and I'm cool with that. Yeah. That's fine.
That's a pretty amazing experience, spending a bit of time with Julian, particularly up at his place, seeing his vineyard.
Well, that's the wine that started everything.
Sure.
For me, anyway.
Exciting. Yeah. And so... coming up in the future, you're going to run the event again, or just continue writing on the blog and more articles?
We're going to plan to do What's in Your Glass again next year. Yeah, certainly. I've got a little bit of things to do between now and then. I'm going to be making some wine for fun in the upcoming Hunter Valley vintage. Yeah. I'm speaking with Ross McDonald from Macquarie Dale. And we're going to try and figure out to make just a small batch of something. I'm thinking a field blend. Yep. Really don't know, to be honest. I'm just curious to learn. We'll be going to do vintage over in Central Otago next year at Quartz Reef and at
with Rudy.
With Rudy.
It's exciting.
And at Ripon as well. So that'll be cool to sort of spend 2 weeks in the Central Otago. B, to just be surrounded by awesome people and wine. Yeah. And then obviously we'll have What's in Your Glass. There's lots and lots going on, and it's good fun. These are good problems to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a lot of energy and a lot of interest, as you say, in wines of this nature, both from Australia and being imported. So I think there's lots of opportunities.
Absolutely. If I can just basically, and not me personally, but it'd just be a small, tiny little piece of that promotion of what Australian wines are capable of.
Sure.
Because there are some incredible wines that are made here, and they're not all the cheap, £6 a bottle Tesco's budget savers. They are premium, amazing, gorgeousness, beautiful, incredible wines that need to be on someone's table somewhere, and someone going, whoa, is this from Australia?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And New Zealand as well. But New Zealand doesn't have as big of a problem presenting itself as I think Australia does. But
it already has a much more premium, certainly cool climate.
Premium tag is already established.
Absolutely.
Australian have a lot to catch up on, but, they're such incredible winemakers. They're so generous. They're so intelligent. They're so thoughtful. They're making these things.
Yeah.
And someone needs to hear about it.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate you stopping by whilst you're in Melbourne, Daniel. Enjoy the rest of your time here in Victoria, obviously, and hope to see you again soon in the future.
No worries, James. Thanks for having me, mate.
Okay. Thanks again, guys. Make sure that you follow Daniel on Twitter. He is at the Wine Idealist, and go and visit his blog, which you'll find at wineidealist.com. You can follow myself at Intrepid Wino. You can follow the podcast at the Vincast, both on Twitter, and make sure you subscribe on iTunes or at the blog intrepidwino.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.